Welcome to the Ministry Pivot Podcast with Russell St. Bernard, a podcast designed to assist leaders as they seize the season of opportunity by pivoting toward it. Let's get started with today's episode.
Hey, family, Reverend Russ back again with another Ministry Pivot. Super excited that you all decided to join us, whether it's tonight, whether it's this morning, whether it's this afternoon, whenever it is, whether you're watching or listening. Super excited to have you on. I have a great another podcast for you on today, another episode in our Succession series. Remember, we're dropping these throughout some of our other podcast episodes to make sure that you are informed, but Pastoral Succession. And so don't forget to go on ministrypivot.com and .org and .com, all of them, and just make sure that you click the show notes, but you also go on and look at our articles, our conversations. And of course, if you want coaching, you can look at that as well. Today, I have none other than Reverend Dr. Charlie Dates, who's the senior pastor of both Progressive Baptist Church as well as Salem Baptist Church in the Chicagoland area. He is an awesome pastor, an awesome leader. You'll hear me say some of this already, but just get ready for a great conversation around pastoral succession with Pastor Charlie Dates. Let's go. Pastor Dates, thank you so much for getting on to Ministry Pivot, man. I'm so honored to have you on with us today, tonight, whenever people are listening. Thank you for jumping on, getting on with us here at Ministry Pivot. I gave you a brief intro, but I just want you to give us a little bit more of an intro. We know that you are the senior pastor of Progressive Baptist Church and Salem Church. We know that you are an awesome pastor, leader, husband, father, the Lord's preacher. Amen. I'm one of the preachers who glean and listen to you weekly as well. But I might have missed something, and I don't want the people to be deprived of knowing some more about who Pastor Dates is. So again, thank you for getting on. But if you can share a little bit more about Pastor Charlie Dates.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Bro Russell. And you're a saint. Clearly, it says in your name, Saint Bernard. So it's it's an honor to be on. Let me rush to say that I don't know. I think your descriptors, modifiers for me are very generous. I mean, I'll leave that to you guys, but I hope that in the end of the day that I'm being faithful to my sense of assignment and call. But yeah, I'm born and raised in Chicago. I am husband to Kirsty, Elizabeth, father to Charlie and Claire, and I have the privilege of serving in the city I grew up in as it relates to ministry. But I'm an avid Chicago sports fan. I am a budding. I should be much better than a budding golfer. But I've been playing way too long to not be as good as I should be. And man, I enjoy much of life in the regular space like any other dude. And so I think all of the other things that come with titles and achievements and accomplishments are good. But man, I'm just a guy who really loves people, and I'm thankful to be able to serve the church.
Amen. Amen. Well, thanks again for getting on. Thanks for that. And I do think every descriptor we gave you and even more can be added. I've been able to watch your ministry. Shout out my pastor, Pastor Matthew Watley. Love you. That's my guy here at Kingdom Fellowship. And he introduced me to you the first time. And then it's just been awesome hearing you, seeing you, watching you, and loving the way I see the two of you all kind of grow as brothers. And so that's been cool for the folk who sit in my seat, not the senior seat, but those who support you all. It's been really cool. Can you tell us though, so we're talking about pastoral succession. You have been the pastor of Progressive Baptist Church for how many years?
13
Progressive Baptist Church, and now also the senior pastor of Salem. Is it Salem Baptist or Salem?
It's Salem Baptist.
Yeah. Salem Baptist Church. I think that's the question by itself. How is that? How has that transpired? And then we'll talk about the pastoral succession part. You may deal with it as well with Pastor Meeks. Big shout out to Pastor Meeks and all the great work that he's done in the Chicagoland area. Pastor Phil Jackson out of Lawndale Community Church is one of my mentors. And
Oh
so I've
man.
known about Pastor Meeks. I've known about Chicago for years.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool. But yeah, so
Yeah.
help us with that if you can.
Sure. So I came to the senior pastorate at Progressive in 2011 from the post as the young adult pastor and director of church operations at Salem. And I had been serving there for 5 years. And so I actually am a graduate of Salem Christian Academy. Salem at one point had an elementary school on the south side of Chicago. And
Okay.
so I literally came of age and grew up in one sense under the shadow of Pastor Meeks. And so I joined the staff there after I finished the MDiv, and he made it pretty clear about 3 years in that he intended for me to succeed him as the pastor at Salem. Now, at that point, I'm probably 27, 28 when that happens, and am just blown away. But I ended up going to serve Progressive as a senior pastor, older, historic, declining Black church.
Mm.
Median age was about 65, might have been 150 people there on a Sunday morning. And it was just in bad shape, man. I mean, like a
Wow.
lot of our historic, unfortunately, traditional Black Baptist churches just was in disrepair. But man, God gave us grace. I cut my teeth, as it were, in those first few years and saw the church revitalize. It did not, it jumped right away. Excuse me. It
Hmm.
jumped right away, and then it kind of eased its way forward. And we've seen these kind of explosive moments and um, moments then that ease out or level out. So I didn't know what the future held. It was kind of like this. That's my point. And so I started to sense um, that there was something more for me to do. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it meant leaving Chicago. I didn't know if it meant something happening at Progressive. But literally 1 year, about 5 opportunities came at one time. And they were
Wow.
all, with the exception of one, they were all outside of Chicago. And my wife did not want to explore any of them. She's more of a settler, if you will. And so
Yeah.
I called Pastor Meeks, and I just, I was walking through these opportunities, these doors that were opening, and it's that time of life, like 36, 37, 38, where if you're going to make a move, that's the time in one sense to make the move. And so I remember him saying to me, well, man, if you're going to go, then you should come back home. And so I said, well, I don't know. We literally committed it to prayer, and Russell, it's the only way I know how to explain it. I felt called to go to Salem, but I did not feel called to leave Progressive. The churches are about 11 miles apart. They both span and stretch the south side of Chicago. Progressive is just south of downtown. Salem is almost as far south as you can go. One exit past it, you're out of the city. And I told Pastor Meeks that. And he said, okay, okay. Uh, no, nobody had been thinking of or talking about doing anything. It was odd. It was odd. I had no ambition to do this. It was me trying to be faithful to my sense of call and discernment. And so we started to try to work through it, and we made some progress, then we didn't make progress. We made some progress, we didn't make progress. And then the pandemic hit. And so that slowed everything down. We were going to pull the trigger um, in 2020 and in the summer of 2020, but the pandemic did what it did. And the pandemic, in this regard, ended up accelerating things because I think for somebody like Pastor Meeks or a long tenured legacy pastor, they you don't want them to feel rushed in the
Mm.
process. Even if it's their idea, you want them to feel like the time is there. And I think, man, that pandemic just accelerated that feeling for him that the time was there. And so he gave me his blessing. There was one transition coach that told him that he felt like this was doable, that I could serve both churches. And to this day, Reverend Meeks, I mean, he stood up in front of Progressive and said, I don't know how this is going to happen. This is 22. at this point. I don't know how this is going to happen. He said, but I trust Charlie. And man, that was a huge, enormous weight. It is a huge, enormous weight. But I'll be doggone, man, if I mean, the first year and a half, we're past year and a half now, God has shown himself strong, so much so that Progressive has grown wildly deeper, I think, and stronger, and numerically for sure, and in other ways, since the transition than it did any other year since my first year. So
Wow.
it is, I mean, it's hard to explain. You just have to be there to see it. So I'm there less, but it's picked up more. Salem, likewise, in 2023, I'm told by all the metrics, had a banner year. And,
Amen.
but it's Black church, Chicago, man. And there are unique challenges, excuse me, there are unique challenges that come with where we are, with the way that young people are going to church and not going to church, with how relevant our ministries are to society, how we're shifting and shaping the cultural milieu with our ministry outside of the four walls of the church.
Yeah.
Those things affect the dynamics. But in light of all of that, Salem, still is attracting a significant number of people, still carries a significant amount of influence. And we were able to make some spurts, some changes in multiple ways last year. So how's it working? That's how it's working. There's a sense in which I carry the DNA of Salem to Progressive,
Yeah.
and that helps to shift things there. We even have some of the young adults that I did ministry with who came with me to help do it. And now those young adults with me serving the leadership of that church, and now are helping the work at Salem, the work of transition and revitalization. So it's really a cross-pollination of DNA, as it were, a stronger, healthier church, helping to bring to life a weaker, dying church. Now that church is up and going and strong, it now has come back to the mother church, so to speak, to help strengthen and equip it to do that work of multiplication.
Wow. Wow. That's phenomenal. So the operational, and I told you this off camera, operational person in me, the backup person in me wants to dig into how, but I want to, we may have time for that. I may have to ask after you come back to do a second one so we can dig into how. But I
Sure.
want to ask for the pastor, for the leader who's listening, because this is around pastoral succession. And what God is doing through you, through Salem, and through Progressive is truly unique. But I want to talk about and focus a little bit more on Salem and the conversations and the prayer and the equipping, the transition coach that you and Pastor Meeks went through. Because my attention is, and we said this off camera, we said this before, this is number 6 now in this series of pastoral succession. And there was a research study came out some years ago between Varner, Black Millennial Cafe, big shout out to Dr. Bree. And the stat is that over 40% of pastors who were 60 said that they would not retire in the next 10 years. And Pastor, what that obviously means is that there are going to be several pastors who sit in the seat that you sat a couple months ago, or years ago rather. And what does that after, and they may not have had as strong a relationship with the legacy pastor as you had with Pastor Meeks. What does that look like? What are the things that they should be thinking about? How did you grow and learn through that decision? Now, those are a lot of questions because I just want you to hit just kind of that feeling for who's listening, who's watching.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say too, if there is a older pastor who fits that 60 plus age range, who's watching, let me say that it may be a mistake to stay in that chair a lot longer. There is a sense in which your ministry will grow in relevance and impact if you exit that stage while setting up somebody to succeed you. I think sometimes it's not merely financial. It's a pastor wondering, are they still relevant? How can they yet leverage the influence of the pastorate? And so I would say prepare now We don't need Joe Biden kind of, you got to be in there until it's obvious that you're unable
Mhm.
to handle it and you cripple a succeeding generation. So I shout out to Reverend Meeks. I mean, that's really what I'm saying. For he was early 60s when he
Mm.
asked me to come back. And so I don't know the emotional toil and tax that it took to get to that point. But I would say to some younger pastor who's going to assume this seat, there are a few things that you want to prepare your heart for. Number one, um, the people will yet be madly in love with your predecessor to the extent that in some ways you become a highly proficient chaplain before you become pastor. And you have
Wow.
to be emotionally okay with that that everybody loves that person because they have decades, some of them, with that person. And so um, going into this, and I had a little bit of practice, but I'm aware that my job is to take care of both the church and the outgoing senior pastor. And what I mean by take care of is more so emotionally to take care of because he's giving over his life's work. And so I don't want it to seem like my coming in means that he and his ministry are now forgotten and irrelevant. No, I actually want him to know that his ministry is what has added a lot of significance and meaning to my ministry. And
Wow.
when you do that publicly, you actually affirm the wisdom you have in front of the people. You win with the people to the extent that you're able to love on and shepherd and take care of the outgoing pastor. So Pastor Meeks has done me an enormous favor in that he basically left the scene for the first year and a half. I don't know when he's going to come back. I mean, he preached for us the month of August last year. He's preaching the month of August this year, but he did not want to be an eye shot of me
Mhm.
as I move the church forward. So he has been everywhere but Salem. And so I'm the beneficiary of that. But I at the same time am calling his name in every instance that I can at staff meetings, in small group meetings, at funerals, at the large group weekend services, the midweek services, because it's important that I demonstrate that I'm in a line, I'm in a continuum with him. I'm not some new adaptation, different, whatever. But although I am new and I am different, I'm in succession. So I would say
That's great.
prepare your heart for that and then do your best to communicate to that outgoing senior pastor that their ministry is a significant reason why your ministry exists in this way. And then so that there's that. Then there is the whole take your time to be yourself with the congregation. I'm not Reverend Meeks. Reverend Meeks is he's late 60s now, or close to late 60s. He's not late. He's 60. I don't want to give his age, but um, he he has a certain generational swagger, and he's like one of the sons of Issachar. He just knew what to do.
Mhm.
But he's a different kind of leader. I I'm a I think the person who plants the church typically has a different leadership temperament than the person who succeeds the planter. And so
That's good.
his driving style had to get the church up and going, very entrepreneurial. My style is more connective, collaborative systems, teams, that kind of thing to now let the church kind of build its own identity apart from the senior pastor. and
Yeah.
and so that just requires time. It just requires time, and so
Yeah.
it's good to not be just like your predecessor, and it's good to let that show. But Russell, I say take your time in letting it do it in preaching and leadership and disciple making and in decisions. Take your time and let those distinctions be made known.
No, that is phenomenal. There's no way that everybody heard everything. So please don't forget to get the show notes. Big shout out Brianna in the background. She's taking notes. So the show notes will be available. You said several things, Pastor, and I want to ask you two questions because I see the time. I want to ask you two questions, but I want to go back to so the first question is, again, not again, but you and Pastor Meeks had a different relationship, and I think that was awesome and that's phenomenal. But there may
Sure,
be somebody that's coming in
sure.
with a
Yeah,
search committee, right? And they don't
yeah,
really have that, but it's
yeah,
still the same setup. So I want to, for
yeah,
the search committee, and I love how you talk to the pastor at the pastor that should be thinking about leading, as well as the new pastor that may come in. So I would like for you to do
yeah.
the same on both sides, like the search committee. And then if you're coming in as a search committee selection.
Sure. Well, I mean, let's not forget that that's my experience as well. I mean, it was a search committee
Right,
that
right, right,
invited me
right, right.
to come to Progressive, and I can tell you,
Sorry, right. Yeah.
no, it's all good. I can tell you that you still have to study your predecessor or predecessors. In this case, you're talking about a
Mhm.
long tenure pastor. I
Yeah.
would not recommend going into a church without doing significant research on the history of that church, the major players in that church, and the pastor of that church, learning dates and
Good.
accomplishments and achievements and shifts and people. And then what I did was I invited those pastors back to preach in my first year at varying points. So I would say to the pastor who's been found by search committee and they're succeeding a legacy pastor, go sit with that pastor and make it your mission to learn that pastor's heart. And then as often as that pastor will come back, in our instance, I had to beg Reverend Meeks to come back. But I was able to get him for one Sunday, and then I was able to get him for the whole month. So as often in one sense as you can plan for them to be in front of the church, insofar as it's a healthy relationship,
Yeah.
then I would do it, because if that pastor is able to discern the good of your ministry and affirm that, it's going to go a long route. Now, if that pastor's not healthy, that pastor's
Yeah.
not well, then I
Yeah.
think you carry the legacy of that pastor in your decision making. You call their name, you print their name on stuff. You if you can name things after the pastor or celebrate the pastor's family. I think Marcus Cosby did an amazing job. Shout out to Marcus to this. His
Mhm.
predecessor recently passed away, but he did an enormously effective work at caring for Pastor Lawson and being sure that Pastor Lawson's name was in front of the church. Um, and they had some relationships, some overlap there. But when you don't, those principles are still effective. It just may take
Yeah.
you longer.
Pastor, I wanted to ask you, you said it a moment ago, but you said, and I didn't hear it. I didn't think about it this way, but I heard it differently when you said it, that the legacy pastor, this is their life's work.
Yeah.
And so the meaning of that as the new pastor comes in, whether he or she steps in that space, there's got to be some insight. But where I want to go with this, pastor, is not just the fact that it's their life's work, but even some of the staff and the team
Mm,
also, because you
hmm.
stated, which I thought was phenomenal, the thought of being chaplain to both the church and the pastor, which
Hmm.
is a whole thing by itself. But the life's work, and how do you, what's, so the question is, what is the advice to the new pastor coming in, about to come in after a legacy pastor, who's they've given their life to this ministry, to this call, but not only they've given life to ministry to this call, they also have a team of people who may or may not fit. And I'm not trying to do hiring and firing now, but that is a weight that I never thought about.
Oh, yeah. Well, if the question is how to handle it, I would
Yes.
say philosophically, you first have to acknowledge it that this is like a baby in one sense. This isn't your work yet. So you have to care for another person's stuff
Mhm. Yeah.
and people.
Yeah.
And as you do that, you have to be a student to learn the networks, the heart connections that people have. So I mean, I got Pastor Meeks's admin, I got his whole staff. I mean, his children were on the
Wow.
staff,
Yeah.
and and it takes a lot of decrease in ego, I think, to walk in the door and to go, hey, I know y'all are used to Pastor Meeks. I know that you're used to his style, and that's great. And so I'm going to do the as best I can to take care of you. So my initial idea was not to release or transition any staff for the first calendar year. It was to say, as best I could, that we're going to stick together for a year. That gives you a chance to figure out if you want to work with me, and that gives me a chance to figure out if we are a good fit to keep working with one another. So I made some additional hires coming in to build an executive team for myself, but I did not disrupt the remaining staff for the most part. I did not disrupt the remaining staff so as to help the church keep its equilibrium too. Because whereas Pastor Meeks was the senior pastor in front of the church, that staff actually executed the work and did what needed to be done. Those are the people the church were most familiar with when it came down to operational matters. So we just hung it out, and really it was my benefit. I mean, if you can, in a transition, there are going to be so many things that come at you. If you can, just do as much within your power to protect preaching space. That's really what you want to do for the first year is preach. Yeah. So if you can stay out of the weeds of a lot of other things, and everybody's situation is the same. Sometimes you got to come in right away and figure out financial things, and put out fires or stuff you didn't know existed till you got there. You know, those things happen. But if you can come in and just like preach and get to know the people and love them and let them get to feel you, trust me, that first year will fly by in that regard.
No, that's helpful. That's so two last questions that I want to ask. One is, what surprised you as you were transitioning? What surprised you in this transition? And then the last question is going to be your family, right? So you all were able to stay. My wife and I, we did a transition from here to Florida for a couple years to serve, and then we transitioned back. And that's always a thing. But what surprised you in the transition? And then I would love to end with talking about family.
Yeah, so I think twofold. What surprised me is the Progressive story, quite frankly. It is that Progressive, so Progressive released me. Salem received me. I actually think that it's probably harder to release in the way that this narrative came together. And so they did that and just were enormous in heart in doing so. And I think God is blessing that church in a significant way. That surprised me. I think with the Salem piece, I've been pleasantly surprised at how strong this church is. How its membership and leadership are so devoted to truth, are so devoted to the proclamation and the ethics of the gospel, that even with a new voice and a new face, albeit familiar, those tenets and those principles are yet there. And so they are easy to love and easy to lead in that regard. So I've just been surprised at how they've responded. I mean, you know, you follow a legend and you just imagine everybody's going to start calling you his name. You know, they come up to greet you. And I've had some of that. I've had, you know, there's a lady, she hadn't been able to come to church because she just misses Reverend Meeks. So she comes when he's there. And and that's, you know, hey, it is what it is. That's fine. But you expect to get a lot of that. I didn't get as much of that. I got people who, you know, just warmly received me. So very grateful.
That's awesome. That is awesome. That is
and
awesome.
Family, you know, man, this has been like the hardest thing and the best thing, I think, for my family and for my marriage. I think that so much of this call is for my family, to be honest with you. It's for my wife, it's for my children, that they, in one sense, and I don't put any weight on my kids in this regard, but I think we had grown accustomed to the work at Progressive, and I'd be stretching and pulling, but man, this transition is stretching and pulling us. So it's in one sense making the family own the call. And to see it's all of us linked into this, and everybody's gifts are required in service, not just dads, but everybody's gifts have a role to play in the life of the church. And I think as a pastor with a family, that's what I want. I want my kids to like love the Lord and love the church. I want my wife to take that ownership on their own apart from me. And so I think everybody sees that there's a lot on the table here to be done, so that when the kids come of age, they are not just going to church, is my prayer, because mom and dad make them, but because they love the Lord themselves, and they feel compelled to serve he and his people on their own. And so I think this has magnified the sense of God's call on our family and on my life for them, to the point where they are pitching in.
Wow. That is great. And so I hear you saying there's a space and a role for them, and answering the call or walking alongside the call with you, with the church. I think it's super important.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody in the house needs to have their own connection and relationship with the Lord and the church. And I think this transition has raised the magnitude and the necessity for that. Everybody, Claire, Charlie, and Kiersey, we all have a role to play here, and we're going to do it.
No, I think that is awesome. Thank you again, Pastor, for getting on today with us before you take a couple weeks out, which is going to be awesome. Excited for you and your family with that. Is there anything, as we talked about Pastoral, I think we hit a lot of pieces, but is there anything that we may have left on the table for those who are watching, those who are listening, on either side of the field, whether they are the search committee or they're the senior pastor?
Yeah, I think the burden of my heart is that this be a joyful story. You hear so many rugged horror stories that younger people going into succession and committees and senior pastors who are leaving need to see that this can be a pleasant experience.
That's good.
I mean, you'd have to have, and maybe that's another angle of this. Maybe you should have if they are alive and well, the predecessors in a podcast series, because you'd have to hear from them. But I would hope that my predecessor, my pastor, would say, it's been hard, it's been emotionally difficult, it's been a toil, but here's the good side of it. And I think for the people watching, you need to know there is a lot of good to this, a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyable life lessons that come as a result. So don't be scared, and don't be pensive, but release yourself into the caring grace of God and experience what you never thought was possible.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Pastor Dates, for getting on with us today at Ministry Pivot. Super excited about all the work that God has you doing there in Chicago locally, but man, the work that you're doing globally. So super excited for you and for your family and for all that you do. Thanks again for getting on Ministry Pivot, man.
Bless you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, hopefully you were inspired, you were informed, you were also excited about the work that Pastor Charlie Dates is doing there in the Chicagoland area at Salem Baptist Church and Progressive Baptist Church. I'm going to have him back. We're going to talk about operations when he gets back from his break. Super excited that he's getting that time away. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, follow, subscribe. That's how this podcast gets moved up in the ratings. Don't forget about the show notes that you'll be able to learn from and glean from, be able to get all of the research that is there. I am excited about what God is doing in this season, but I'm really excited about what God is going to do in the season to come, because this is your season of opportunity. All you have to do is pivot toward it. God bless.
That's it for today's episode of the Ministry Pivot. We hope you enjoyed listening and gaining some valuable insight. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss out on our future episodes. And if today's show has resonated with you, please leave us a review to help others discover our podcast. For more resources and updates, visit our website at ministrypivot.com. And be sure to join our email list as well as follow us on Instagram at Ministry Pivot. Thanks for joining us today, and we're excited to have you back next time for another insightful episode of Ministry Pivot. Stay connected, keep pivoting. We'll see you soon.